Welcome to the Java Cafe, Java fam. Good morning. Welcome to the Java Cafe, Java fam.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Today is Monday, January 17th, 2022. It is Martin Luther King Day, and we have a wonderful, she's not a guest, but my friend and sister in the room, and I see her back there smiling. So I'm not going to waste any time and get ready to bring her in. But I want to ask you all to do me a favor and ensure, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, Twitter is giving me some trouble, but the YouTube link is there. Share this because we want to hear from our Congresswoman around the Voting Rights Act, the advocacy that she's doing, and just check in on her as well. And so we're going to get ready to bring her into the room. Now, I do this every day, and she is my friend and sister, but I am still nervous, Jesus. Good Rep. You are looking, so I seen her in the background. I texted her and said, "You're looking radiant, and you look even more radiant now that you're fully in the studio."
Oh, you're so kind. Thank you. It's good to see you. You know, you're still drinking from that fountain of youth. I see.
I'm trying, and I'm trying to stay with you, but you are looking wonderful and you're sounding wonderful, and it is MLK Day, and I know we have a lot to talk about, but yes, Congresswoman, as we always do, we check in on you. We're a year out from the insurrection. Yes, I love the cup. We're a year out from the insurrection, and I know you've talked about that. I saw Sarah's tweet about it. And so I want to check in with you and see how you're doing. I know you're well aware of what our local mayor is dealing with. And so, you know, there's a lot of things going on. How are you, with all due respect, as Ayanna, the mom, the wife, the Black woman, how are you doing this morning on MLK Day?
Yeah, well, good morning, you know, Jimmy, and good morning to all the Java with Jimmy listeners. And again, I just want to thank you for, you know, creating this platform in this space, you know, just during what has really just been an unprecedented time, you know, for the city, for the Commonwealth, for our country. You know, how am I doing? You know, I've been asked a lot, do I feel safer since the insurrection? And you know, my response to that is, you know, I'm a Black woman in America, so there are very few places where I have ever felt fully safe. And we can make investments in physical infrastructure at the Capitol to attempt to protect ourselves from a future breach. But ultimately, this insurrection was a backlash to historic record voter turnout of the most marginalized. That insurrection, that attempt to interrupt the peaceful transfer of power, was a white supremacist backlash to the voting power and strength of Black and Brown communities. They questioned the legitimacy of the ballot, sought and continue to undermine free and fair elections. And so we have seen what happens when there is inaction, when there is inertia, there is insurrection. So the point here is that white supremacy remains a threat to everyone who calls this country home and to our democracy, as evidenced by the precise and coordinated attack on voting rights. We've seen 19 states introduce voter suppression laws, 49 states, well, 19 states passed voter suppression laws, and 49 states have now introduced new pieces of legislation, which is why I always say policy is my love language, because injustice is legislated.
Yes.
Now, as for your other question, since you brought up our mayor, because white supremacy has been emboldened by a complicit white moderate, which we see that playing out in the voting rights fight right now in our Senate, white supremacy is thriving. And so because white supremacy is thriving, there is a rise in anti-Black and anti-Muslim, Asian, immigrant, anti-Jewish sentiment. And women of color in high-profile positions have been in the unenviable position of a targeted amount of violence, vitriol, and hate. Now, as elected officials, we know it is a par for the course that there will be dissenting opinion about the positions we take, the policies we seek to advance, but that should never be showing up in hateful, dangerous ways. And that has been on the rise and emboldened, and that's why we have to call it out every single time.
Congresswoman, thank you. And I was going to transition into that because we know that, and I don't know if you're his exact predecessor or who, but Tip O'Neill said that all politics are local. And so that you refer to that has been emboldened by, I take from you, he who used to occupy the White House. And so all politics are local. And there's a comment in here that talks about, there's a being scared. And so my belief and what I've been asserting is that the vaccination mandate happens to be an outlet for a demonstration of an undercurrent to which you just referred around. There is so much change going on this country. Some have said, the browning of America or whatever. And so you spoke a little bit about the Voting Rights Act, and we are here on MLK Day. There's been some, sort of back and forth about part of the King family saying, we're not going to celebrate. I heard Bernice King the other night, and you'll appreciate this because you always talk with me about, just what we're doing in this space. But Bernice King tweeted me back the other night, and she tweeted a video around clarity that we are to commemorate his legacy. And wow, and you did this in your own little inauguration. You commemorated the historical win of a Black woman in Congress from this seat for the first time. But I want to say somber. It was an atmosphere that said there's still more work to do. We're praying, but our feet seem a little stuck. So if you could talk to us a little bit about the Voting Rights Act. Legislation has been introduced. Joe Biden went to Atlanta and did everything. But how is it, Congresswoman, that this is still in its present state?
Yeah. Well, I think what the King family is saying, and Bernice, in particular, who I'm working with on finishing the legacy initiated by Coretta Scott King and trying to advance a federal job guarantee. So she and I have been working closely together on that. But we should not celebrate, but we should honor. And what we're being challenged to do in this moment is to do more than tweet Dr. King's words, but to live by them. And this is a challenge for us as a nation. And I would argue, being parochial, and because this is my party, as Democrats, which is that, we espouse values that we are not consistent in the application and the practice of. And so this is why recently I said, if you are going to celebrate, but you are not prepared to legislate, then please keep Martin, John, and Coretta's names out of your mouth. Now, I have many colleagues across the aisle who will reference Dr. King's quote, the content of our character and not the color of our skin. And that's their way of perverting his words and weaponizing them to justify white supremacy. And the point is, Dr. King was an original architect of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Come.
So what part of you would think for a second that what he was not fighting for was the full emancipation and equal rights of Black Americans? Yes, of other marginalized people and justice for all, but stridently and unapologetically for Black Americans. So how is it that we are still in this moment? Well, there have been incredible gains because of many of the freedom fighters whose names we know and many that we don't.
That's right.
But gains are not guarantees, which is why the movement has to remain vigilant. We have to fight like hell to preserve the gains that have been made and to build upon them. So, gains are not guarantees when the white moderate is complicit and white supremacy thrives. Gains are not guarantees when there is inaction, inertia, and insurrection. Gains are not guarantees when faith is shallow and boycotts are short-lived and second-class status is considered an inevitability. So I want to make sure you're hearing what I'm saying in this moment, because recently I was asked by a colleague, do you want to be Malcolm or Martin? And, I take a special claim to both of these righteous Black men who have connections and roots to Boston. But, I seek to be both.
Come.
Because Malcolm was in the urgency of now, and Dr. King was, about the foundational work of generational transformative change in the future. But moreover, if you really want to be like Martin, then be disciplined, because the movement was disciplined. And the organizing and the mobilizing and the boycotting and the resistance was all to inform legislation. So I know that folks will be like, I don't care about politics, I don't care about policy, and I'll get in the weeds on something and folks' eyes start glazing over. It all comes down to policy. And so again, if you as a lawmaker are willing to celebrate, but not to legislate, please have a seat, several, because gains are not guarantees when we fight to preserve a Jim Crow filibuster over preserving democracy. We do not have, in 2022, people have been enjoying this docuseries on Mamie Till, Mothers of the Movement.
Right.
We do not have in 2022 an Emmett Till anti-lynching act because of the filibuster. We do not have gun reform because of the filibuster. Immigration reform because of the filibuster. And we could not have voting rights restored because of the filibuster. The movement has met the moment at every turn. It is those movement builders and freedom fighters in the civil rights movement of today who delivered Georgia, who delivered this Democratic majority, and they cannot be expected to out-organize this suppression. They can't be expected, nor should they. Mm-hmm. And so we have got to pass. The House has already, passed the Freedom to Vote Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. The Senate is going to take it up. And I know people say, well, it's likely that it's not going to move because of what Kristen Sinema has said and Joe Manchin has said. But you know what? Call the vote. I'm glad Leader Schumer is calling the vote. Get folks on record being clear about which side they're on. If they're on the side of truth or fiction, are they on the side of righteousness or hate, white supremacy or democracy? Oh. And get these folks on the record. And if they choose wrong, then the electorate needs to put them on notice. And the last thing I would say about that is we have got to expand this Democratic majority in the Senate. And so I really want to make sure that, for as long as we have this very slim majority, it is going to be very challenging. So we have our work cut out for us, but in the here and now, we need a carve out of the filibuster to pass the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. So what's in there? So I'll give some top lines, making Election Day a federal holiday, preventing the practice of partisan gerrymandering, which is another way to disenfranchise the electorate. So those are just some of the things that I would offer here, but it's just critical that we pass this legislation. Voting rights is fundamental to everything else. It is the core of our democracy, and it's not hyperbole. Like, our democracy is really under attack. This is an attempt to silence the will of the people and our voices.
So, Congresswoman, with that being said, my background is advocacy, picking up a phone, sending an email, tweeting, and all of that. And so we're here. We're not in district where people, thank God we have you. And so we're not in a district to where we need to fight. So you mentioned fight. You mentioned in a synopsis sort of way of holding the line, because legislation introduced is good. It's passed at one level. So what is it that your constituency can do as far as phone calls, as far as tweets? What is the assignment? We got this meme going around. I understood the assignment. Help us understand the assignment, Congresswoman.
Yeah. Well, first, I do want to just push back a little bit on your frame that we're not in districts where we need to be, worried. And I know that that's a nod to, and you're being generous about, my leadership and the fight that I do. But the fact of the matter is, the assault on voting rights, just because we're not in a red state, doesn't mean that there isn't more work to be done here in Massachusetts. And so, yeah, because there's still, if there is not automatic voter registration, which is one of the tenets of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, if there's not automatic voter registration, if there's not mail-in ballots for every election, if you don't have early voting in every election, these are ways that the electorate is disenfranchised, because ultimately it's up to us to make voting as convenient as possible, access to the ballot as convenient as possible, so that you are not disenfranchising the most vulnerable, who are in the greatest need of representation around policy and decision-making tables: Black and brown folks, disabled folks, low-income people. So we have work to do here, and I would encourage folks, if there's ever been a time to appreciate the importance of secretaries of state, please do pay attention here in Massachusetts. There are more things that we can be doing, some that I've already enumerated, to modernize our elections, to innovate, to make the democratic process that much more accessible. And then there's one bill in particular that I'll lift up in the State House, because I don't want folks to have selective outrage. I think they should be just as committed to ensuring that folks behind the wall have access to the ballot. And there is a bill, snaking its way through the State House right now that would prioritize that access. Partisan gerrymandering is a result of the census process. And in the current census process, why do we push so hard for people to be counted? Because if you're not counted, you don't count. Hello. And so if we know that mass incarceration, African Americans make up 13% of the US population, but represent 40% of those behind the wall, and then you have states where folks don't have those voting rights restored when they reintegrate, and they don't have access to the ballot the whole time they're behind the wall. Meanwhile, they are counted in the census according to where they are being warehoused, and all of those monies, instead of going to the divested, under-resourced communities that we come from, are going to the mostly suburban communities for where our correctional facilities are housed. Okay, so I just want you to see how this is all connected. So if folks, so I just don't want you to have selective outrage. If you're about democracy and voting rights, then that should include everyone having access, from the elderly to the disabled to the low income to those behind the wall to Black and brown folks, and down the line. So pay attention to the state legislature, lean in there. If you don't know what bills are please reach out to Cheryl Crawford, reach out to Mass Vote, and ask them, how can I be a part of the fight locally? Because suppression is not just a challenge in red states.
That's right. And Congresswoman, this is why you're there. And thank you so much. I wouldn't say pushback. This is a platform where we try to educate and inform. And as I just said a few minutes ago, all politics are local. There's demonstration of some of the red state sentiment and mentality, obviously, as we talked about in these local demonstrations against, our local leadership here. And so thank you so much for that. The other thing,
One more thing on that.
yeah.
The other reason why this is important is because in this frame of quote unquote American exceptionalism, the folks that are the most strident in that are in the Northeast. And so what did Dr. King talk about? He said that he experienced what he saw in the Midwest, what he saw in the Northeast, what he saw in my hometown of Chicago, where I was raised, was a greater level of racism than he experienced in the Jim Crow South. So the reason why I'm making this point is because we will think in our the pretentious elitism of the Northeast, and in particular of Boston, that we are so evolved that these are not still challenges in this city. But these things are still very much entrenched and embedded, and that's why it is called institutionalized, structural, systemic racism.
You better teach it. And so what I heard from you was not so much sweep around your own front door, but ensure that the line is held. What is it? It starts at home. Ensure that legislation and legislative movements that are being asserted here in Massachusetts get across the line before we start going to call Manchin and what's her name, Cinema, whatever her name is, the other one.
Yeah,
before we start.
You can do both, y'all.
we can, and I say it often, Congresswoman, we can chew gum and walk at the same time.
Yes.
We're getting ready to have our other guests get ready to come in. What is it? You talked about increasing the Democratic legislature in DC, but how important is it, Congresswoman, that a young, new experience? And I know you have to balance, some incumbents if they're doing great work, but what would you say to people of color that are considering running for office? What would you say to them? I almost said something that Danny Rivera calls you, and I was like, I'm not going to get in trouble.
You don't call me auntie. Lord have mercy. Well, listen, honey, I'm 47 and holding, so whatever you want to call it, okay? About to be 48. Come through, Aquarius Nation.
While we're there, let's wish Darren Howell's birthday is today. Sean Brown's birthday is today.
Oh!
So let's celebrate Sean Brown and Darren Howell. Today's their birthday. Darren crossed over to the big old 40.
Happy birthday. Yes, happy birthday.
But Congresswoman, I was going to say, Auntie Ayanna, just because people look up to you. You have set such a great example. And so I know they would listen and give us, as my sister, what are the atypical things that our candidates don't say to us when we get ready to run for office? What would you say? Mark is in the background listening. What is it that you would say to those that are considering to run for office, Black and brown folks?
I think it's very important that you know your why. That has to be crystallized, because the first question everyone will ask you is, why are you running? Why you? And that can seem like the easiest question to answer, but it can be the hardest, honestly. So know your why. I think it's important that you're not obsessing about the position and the post and the title, but you're clear on your purpose and the impact that you seek to make.
Can you say that again, just so we can, because that's it right there.
Yeah. So just focus on the impact you seek to make and work backwards. Don't obsess about the position, the policy, or the post. So for me, many people asked me, well, do you want to be mayor? And I was never coy about that. It's like, no, I don't want to be mayor.
I remember.
Do you want to become? No, I don't want to become, because the inequities and disparities and racial injustices that exist in the Massachusetts 7th, this chasm of divide from, home ownership to health disparities, life expectancy, and I could go on. Most of this was created by federal legislation. So I always knew that if I were to serve in any capacity other than on the Boston City Council, and ultimately that would be up to God and the electorate to decide that what I would want to do is serve on the federal level. So, but again, I focused first on impact. What's the impact I want to have? Well, I want to address inequities, disparities, and racial injustices. Okay, well, where did that begin? And in my opinion, that was federal legislation. But the point is, it all started with policy. So I knew that was what I wanted to do. Some people want to be an executive, like a mayor or a governor, or a secretary of state or an attorney general, and not have to go through a legislative process. I like the process of legislating. I like building consensus and coalition and doing those sorts of things. So I think it's very important that you know your why, that you know what you do well, because you have to marry those two. And I hope that people would be more compelled and motivated by impact and justice and change than resume and trajectory and elevation.
Congresswoman, I appreciate that. I'm getting ready to bring our candidate in. I have to say, and just because I know there is.
Oh my goodness, Mark! Listen, this breakthrough COVID is no joke. I'm just on the other side of it. So sending healing vibes and energy your way.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Listen, I'm up here and there's things that I don't know. So Mark, we'll talk about that in a second. I so appreciate you coming in to check in with us. I appreciate your leadership. I appreciate the challenges you often present to me to challenge myself to do better. And we also want to acknowledge your transparency from close to 2 years ago, where you revealed publicly about alopecia. And it just, while you bring attention to the medical impact of it, I told you when we talked early on that the radiance that comes out of you, I love everything that you have become and are doing. And it's just, it's just a swag that you have, this freedom fighter, just like, I'm about my business. And thank you so much.
That's very generous. But shout out to the 7 million folks living with alopecia. There's several forms of it. I have alopecia totalis. There's several forms of autoimmune disease where your immune system attacks your hair follicles. People think it's just cosmetic, but there is a psychological impact of this, great stigma, discrimination. And so I'm not just using my platform to raise awareness. I'm also using the power of the pen. I've written legislation to make medically durable rigs, to have them covered by insurance because they can be very cost prohibitive. No, we're not talking about, going to the neighborhood and getting a lace front. I'm talking about medically durable wigs. Those can be very expensive. And then the other is that I was able to advance $5 million in research for alopecia and other autoimmune diseases which disproportionately impact, people of color. Last thing I want to say, since I'm looking at Mark, is that there's such an emphasis in civic engagement on two things, either voting or running for office. But there are so many other things that you can do. And I never want people to underestimate the power of being the person behind the person. I was an aide for 16 years, and people underestimate how often it is the aide, that is in the ear of that elected. It is the aide that is actually writing that legislation. It is the aide that you need to be requesting a meeting for, not just the principal, and the member. So yes, indeed, Black leadership matters. Black elected officials matter, and Black staff matters. So just know that there are many ways with which you can contribute that are meaningful and transformative. Okay,
Congresswoman.
I don't want to filibuster. Happy Dr. Martin Luther King Day, and let's make sure that we do more than quote the King. Let's make sure that we live by those words and not just tweet them.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, Congresswoman. Love you much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Mark, so what did the Congresswoman just reveal? Did I miss something? Did she say something?
I tested positive for COVID last week. Actually, the day after I launched a campaign. And so today's actually really the first day that I've had the energy to be out of bed. So
if I did it with the mayor the other day, I'll do it with you. Are you up to this? Are you okay?
Yes, I am okay. I've been resting for many days. I'm good to go.
Okay.
I'm ready. I'm feeling better.
All right. wasn't how I intended on starting and introducing you. But when the Congresswoman, when she said what she said, I said, wait a minute. All right. So with prayer and healing virtue your way, sir. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing with us who you are today. For those of you that don't know, and I didn't get to do the proper introduction because that kind of threw me off. Mark Martinez is a young man that I met, I believe, almost 2 years ago. And you all may have heard he's been on the show a couple of times. Him and others talk about this movement called Beacon Block. Black leaders of color. No,
building leaders of color.
Building leaders of color. And I got to meet Mark and understood. And if you listen to the Congresswoman and her ending statements, Mark is or was what the Congresswoman referred to in the background. And so Mark has left his job at the State House and he launched his campaign and is running for the 2nd Suffolk State Representative. Seventh. I always get. Thank you so much. Let's make that plain. Seventh.
2nd Suffolk is the Senate seat. 7th Suffolk is the House seat that I'm running for.
And so, Mark, you made this decision. And the Congresswoman laid us up for this good question. So, and I told a few people, I tell people all the time, from friends to candidate, some dynamics change a little bit, but why are you running? Why are you running for the 7th Suffolk? What is it that you're bringing to the table, sir?
I think what I'm bringing.
I'm sorry, I didn't even give you a chance to that news just threw me off. Introduce yourself, sir. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Martinez. Like Jimmy said, I spent the last 3 years working at the State House as legal counsel and budget director to State Senator Patricia Jalen, where I got to work on a lot of things. But the thing primarily, especially in the pandemic, that I worked on was housing, in particular eviction protection, keeping people in their homes during the pandemic, right? People should be kept in their homes at all times. They should have been kept in their homes long before the pandemic, but especially when social distancing and isolation was the key to stopping the spread, though we're still now 2 years into this, it was even more important. It was really, it was a public health response to make sure that people were staying in their homes, but also spent a lot of time working on environmental justice issues, working on economic justice issues, labor issues, a whole host of issues. And, you know, to answer your question about why I'm running, into, you know, the Congresswoman's point, it's that, you know, I think I bring a really rare combination of professional and lived experience and a sense of urgency to the things that are most important, really, to all of Boston, but in particular, the 7th Suffolk, right? When, you know, Jimmy, as you know, when you talk to people, the first issue that everyone talks about in Boston is housing. It's housing. The second issue is housing. The third issue is housing. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I've got that experience. I've got their urgency. I've done that work. I've been in the rooms with people, you know, to protect people from evictions, to build truly affordable housing. And when I say that, I mean the state not being able to tout that they're, you know, or the city being able to tout that they're building units affordable to people at 80% of the AMI. Right?
What is
it?
What is the AMI?
AMI is the area median income, which is how they gauge affordable housing. And so when they say we've built affordable housing, what they mean is they've built housing affordable to people at 80% of the area median income. What that means is that's affordable to people making about $67,000 a year. The area median income in Roxbury is about $35,000.
So you're already being set up at a.
So there's a gap. That's not affordable. That's not affordable. And so, you know, like I said, it's, you know, there are a lot of people, right? Everyone in the State House talks about how they support affordable housing. Every representative. No one's going to say that they don't, but very few have the urgency and are fighting and pushing on this all the time, every day, because it is the most important issue, right? We can talk about everything else. We can talk about environmental justice. We can talk about criminal justice reform. We can talk about health inequities. It all comes back to housing. All of those things become easier if you are safely and securely housed.
I agree. And all of those, we do all the other services. And then if there's no place to go home where they're stable, they kind of, it's almost, I won't say not a waste. It's never a waste in helping people, but it's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. Exactly.
So what are two other areas? I hear housing exuding from you. What are two other areas in which you would go and represent the 2nd Suffolk? Now, this district is changing. And here's where y'all really going to see Mark shine, because now you are a lawyer by trade, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. A lawyer by trade, and you spent the past 3 years with Pat Jalen. So we definitely want to shout her out.
Yes.
And so what from the district is also important to you, in addition to housing? We have seen it. It was one of the number one issues during the mayoral election. And I agree, it is one of the other issues, but there are, and I keep saying seventh, and Carlos Enriquez just corrected me. Seventh. We're going to say
Yes.
seventh. Thank you, Carlos. Other two issues there. You're a man of color. You identify as part of the LGBTQI community.
Absolutely.
And so with all of making up who you are, what are the two other issues, sir, you would address as a legislator?
I mean, there are so many. There are so many, right?
Top two, based on your familiarity in the district.
Yeah, absolutely. Next is environmental justice. One of the I'll never forget the stat that truly shook me to my core that I found out a couple of years ago, actually from listening to former Councillor Andrea Campbell speak, is there's a 30-year life expectancy difference between Roxbury and Back Bay. So that means in 3 T stops, your life expectancy decreases by a decade, by 30 years, as you move closer to Roxbury. Yep. And there's lots of issues. There's lots of reasons why that is. You can't sum that up in one, but one of them is absolutely environmental justice. One of them is absolutely the health impacts of climate change, particularly on communities of color, which also happens to be the communities that contribute the least to climate change. So we're contributing the least to the problem,
and being
but being hit with them the worst. Look at neighborhoods like Roxbury. Look at the high incidences of asthma, right? Which is something that I have, right? That's a direct correlation to environmental justice, and why COVID has hit me so hard is because I have asthma. I have a comorbidity.
Yes, sir.
And so, COVID, even though I'm double vaxxed, I'm boosted, I've done everything I'm supposed to do, and thank God that I have, because I don't know where I'd be if I wasn't. That's a big one. And then the other one is, what I call, public safety, but true public safety, right?
What does that mean to you?
Yes. So public safety to me, a true public safety is one that is defined by how many of our neighbors are having all of their needs met. How much are we investing in the things that we know are actually going to prevent crime and deal with trauma, right? So public safety cannot be defined by how many people are arrested, how many people are incarcerated, how many people are being surveilled by the state. It's how many people are housed, how many people are fed, how many people have access to good paying jobs, how many people have access to mental health services, to physical health services. That's what brings us public safety. And we know that, right? We know that. We know what makes our communities safe, right? I am not unique, especially in Roxbury, and have the experience of having an incarcerated parent. I grew up with a mother that was incarcerated.
Yes, sir.
Guess what? That never made me feel safer, right? Removing my mother from my home it didn't make me safe. It didn't make my siblings safe. It didn't make my community safe. It made us less safe. It destabilized us. It created trauma. And so when I say true public safety, that is what I mean. I mean, defining it by how we are meeting people's needs, not how we are punishing them and ripping them from their community.
While I know that, Mark, hearing it articulated in that manner when I said, what is true public safety? And the way you articulated it was dope. And I'm going to go back and make sure we have that captured like that, because if all of those other things, and we know this, again, in this space, hearing it articulated like that in real time, people in the public are safer and feel safer. Where does and I seen I think Quincy was in, or he had just texted me a couple of minutes ago, when we talk about public safety, Quincy Roberts, who is the city's liaison to the LGBTQI plus community, one of the questions in the survey that talked about public safety as a part of the community, as we both are, where does that fit in the realm of public safety?
I mean, I think it's again, it's the same thing, right? As with every issue, make it criminal justice, housing, whatever it may be, right? Once you start piling on these multiple marginalized identities, right? So once you're Black, once you're queer, right? These things have disproportionate impacts, and so when we talk about how to do these things, right? It's lifting from the bottom. right? The Congresswoman talked about how, yes, Martin Luther King was advocating for all people of color, but unabashed in his support specifically for Black people.
Right.
And it's lifting from the bottom, because it's the idea that if we can create a society in which Black people are safe and secure, everybody's good. And to take that to the next step, in particular, in talking about the LGBTQ community, if we can create a world where Black trans women are safe and housed and fed and cared for, guess what? That's a world where we are all those things. We are all those things. And so, I carry that into everything that I do. When people ask, how do you campaign as an LGBTQ candidate, and how do you do those things? And I just be me. I show up in every space, 100% of who I am, because I've tried to be less than 100% of who I am. I'm not any good at it.
Bruh.
I'm not good at faking.
And it needs to be said, because authenticity, oh God, in real time. And so there is a different cadence. And I love how Congresswoman often refers to the electorate. There's a different cadence in the demand of the constituents of around within your age group. Presumably you're a millennial-ish. And so authenticity has been a huge part of this platform's success, because you most often don't have to wonder what I'm thinking. And so in your authentic self, do you agree that you are made up of multiple experiences and parts? Because the thing that I am so, and this is just personal, James and Mark, I don't want you to be pinned as that candidate, or that. You talked about the whole inclusion of everything that makes you who you are. And so not to get personal, but you're my boy. And, and there's a whole bunch of other issues we need to talk about when we talk about the Black community, LGBTI plus community. But with all of that being said, if successful, what is one of the first things that you will go in the State House and work to get across the line, either that you're aware of now in current legislation, or what would be one of the profound things that you would get with your colleagues and propose? Like, I know you, what's been in the back of your mind? If I win, you probably already have a draft ready, but what is one of the first things, sir, that you would do?
There's so much that I want to do all at the same time. You know me, I can't focus on one thing at any given time. But truthfully, one of the things that I would push for the absolute hardest, because unfortunately I think it's still going to be needed, is one of the things that I've been working on, when I was in the State House, really since the pandemic started. And that is, this COVID-19 eviction bill, right? Which really does strengthen so many housing protections, right? Which will keep people in their homes, right? It would mandate that, landlords aren't able to evict people until, they are able to apply for rental assistance, until they're able to get the help that they need and connected to services. Because, we talk about building affordable housing and building truly affordable housing. That's 1,000% necessary, and that's 1,000% needed. But even if we broke ground tomorrow on 1 million free housing units, guess what? They're not going to be ready tomorrow. They're not going to be ready next week. They're not going to be ready next month. And so what we need to do in the meantime is keep people in their homes. And so that's eviction protection. That's rent control. That's a whole host of things that make it so that while we are doing what we need to do to really tackle the underlying problem, which is create truly affordable housing, people aren't being displaced, right? Especially in places like Roxbury. As long as I've lived here, I can't tell you, and this is not a unique experience, how many neighbors and friends have been pushed out of the neighborhood because they just can't afford to stay here, or because they want to start a family, and starting a family here is just simply no longer affordable. And so, we need some immediate stopgaps, some immediate protections that keep people safe and in their homes while we really tackle the real issue of creating actually affordable housing.
Got you, Mark. And Carlos, again, thank you, because he had me update the bear to Jesus. Because I really that update that the Congresswoman gave me, I obviously am realizing it really threw me off a little bit. I'm like, wait, what?
And so one more, can I add?
Go ahead.
One more thing, just because I want to make sure I don't get off without saying this, just because it ties so nicely into what you and the Congresswoman were talking about. There's this massive fight for voting rights at the national level. But there's also a Votes Act at the State House right now that has passed the Senate is languishing in the House that would do so much for voter access here in Massachusetts. Like you said, we're not done here. And so what the Votes Act would do, it would make permanent the mail-in ballots that we have used so much since the pandemic has started that allowed us to vote safely, increase participation, and especially increase participation in communities of color. It would make same-day voter registration possible because voter registration deadlines, we know who they disproportionately impact, and it's people that look like us and people from communities like Roxbury. It would include some of those jail-based voting reforms that the Congresswoman talked about as well, which are incredibly, incredibly important. And some improvements, to just kind of the administration of voting that, would make sure that people aren't getting left behind. And so, while, we're not Georgia and these other places where we're passing laws to say you can't give people water in voting lines, but there are real life barriers to people right here in Massachusetts, people right here in Boston, accessing the ballot box. And there, like I said, there's a bill at the State House right now that would solve so many of those things. And so I would be remiss if I did not mention the Votes Act on Martin Luther King Day.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And this is why, because I used to always tap into you for some state stuff, just awareness or whatever you went. And shout out to Keys, who I believe is in the room as well. You again, I got a little disheveled around when the Congresswoman shared that you just shared you had tested positive with COVID. In COVID, Mark, you were either virtually or physically in the State House, and you had a very unique lens into what was going on in the State House, the lack of equity and whatnot. How would you legislate as where presumably hopefully that there'll be next winter where, we think the concern might come up again. How would you legislate in all that makes Mark who he is in his life experience and the constituency to which he wants to represent? How would you legislate in a world pandemic?
Yeah. One, we've got to bring, you talk about all these communities that I represent and even, the ones that I don't. It's bringing everybody to the table, right? So much of what we saw during this pandemic was the state saying, we're going to implement this plan. And then lo and behold, data comes back a few weeks later. And guess what? This plan has not reached communities of color. Black people are being left behind. Latinos are being left behind, right? Like all other people, right? Were being left behind. Who was that a surprise to? Were you surprised to see that those communities were being left behind? Because I certainly wasn't. And it's because who was at the table when these things were being designed? It wasn't people that looked like us. Right. And so that's one. It's bringing the communities that I represent, both personally and not, to the table from the ground floor to bring that. And then, the other thing is, there was that news report a while back about how we had this big public health infrastructure that relied so much on local boards of health to respond. And then the state just abandoned it. Right. So just said, never mind, we got it. We'll do this on this big level. And we saw the debacle that created. Right. People have been in community doing this work long before a global pandemic ever came across. And so why we didn't lean on those people, why we weren't giving them money directly to continue to continue their work is wild to me. Right. When we talk about the communities that we're from and, vaccine hesitancy and low vaccine rates and low access to testing, right? Who do people from our communities and our neighborhoods trust? It's not the state, it's not the governor, right? It's their pastor, it's the leader at their community center, it's their neighbor next door.
Yes, sir.
Right? Those are the people that they trust. It's the people that have been in community building that trust for decades, and we've not empowered them. Or when we did, it was too little, too late.
Yeah.
And so, that's it. We have the community tools and the community resources and the people doing the community work to do this outreach, to make sure that these responses are equitable. We're just not using them. We're not investing in them.
And speaking of that, and you and I were in contact a lot with Beacon Block and just keeping up to date, but this is organic and in real time. And you're a poly type brother.
Mm-hmm.
Qualified immunity. You talked about a window, a couple of let's not act. We about to act up. So, Mark, It may come up again. You mentioned something about a window, and I often refer to when it comes to qualified immunity, this proverbial window that, whether how much it's open and how many bodies you can get through. And
Yeah.
where we got a few minutes left. Where are we with where that can go in this new session or in the session in which they're ending up this session.
Yeah.
Correct?
So you're going to ask me that with a few minutes left. So so as we mentioned, right, I'm a lawyer by training. And so when qualified immunity came up, like qualified immunity, it is, I don't think you actually need a law degree to understand most of the things that lawyers think you need to understand, but qualified immunity is complicated, right? And I want to be very clear. The unfortunate truth is, I think it is going to be really, really hard to get anything done on qualified immunity. And I'm going to tell you why. When we did the police reform bill, right, we had an opportunity to truly reform qualified immunity, right? We had an opportunity. It was baked in the bill. There were lots of amendments. There was so much debate behind it. The ACLU, all the other, groups advocating for communities of color told the State House how important reforming qualified immunity was. If we want to really say that this bill has anything to do with accountability, it has to include reforms. Ideally abolishing it, but if not, reforms to qualified immunity. It has to. If we're gonna, if that word accountability in policing means anything, qualified immunity reform has to come. It didn't, and so what happened? It didn't happen. What did happen is what the legislature often does, and it punts the issue by forming a commission. A commission. The commission released its report not too long ago, and guess what it didn't do? Have any recommendations on qualified immunity. You want to know what the official recommendation on qualified immunity from the Special Commission on Qualified Immunity was? Let's wait and see. Let's give the police reform law 2 years to take effect, and then we can address this.
But how many people will be, sorry, go ahead.
And so this commission designed to reform this completely punted on the responsibility, which is not new at the State House. It is not new for them to punt on justice and to leave communities of color holding the bag. And it's not just me. The ACLU has put out statements on this. Lawyers for Civil Rights have put out statements on this, that it was it's an absolute miscarriage of justice, that their response was, let's wait and see. So we've waited long enough. And we've seen what has happened. Black people don't need to wait and see on this anymore. We know.
So Mark, where and we've talked about this, to Carlos's point here, who, for those of you that may not know, I'm referring to Carlos a lot because he was not in this seat, but was in a similar seat. I believe it was, now I can get this district right, the 5th Suffolk district. And so
Seven.
No, Carlos was. What was?
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Come on, I'm already messing up enough, Jesus. But no, so one of the points that he just made here, and he and I have talked about this, Darren Howell, we've talked about this. If you are successful, can we count on this same level of engagement and information sharing?
Absolutely.
I'm in the space, Mark, and some of the details of what you just broke down in a manner from a chronological standpoint, whatever, I may have known, but just so much going on, not remembered all. But had the community been more engaged before last 2 days left in the session and everybody's fighting to get to the State House virtually and make their speech.
Yes.
Where does community information, education, mobilization, and engagement fall on your priority list as a candidate?
Top. I can't, all the other things that I talk about, right? The things that I'm passionate about, the issues that I laid out, don't happen if my community isn't there pushing. And I wish that wasn't the case, right? Because all of these things are common sense. All the things that I'm talking about are common sense. We know how they would benefit communities like the 7th Suffolk. We know that. But unfortunately, it requires a push. It requires public pressure to get those things done. And so, we talked about Beacon Block and how, a big part of their mission was uplifting and empowering staffers of color, in particular, Black staffers. And that's 100% true. That is 100% accurate. That is a huge part of what we did. The other part of what we did was go into community, work with organizations, and train community advocates.
You did, yep.
On the legislative process. How does it work? How do you plug in? How do you advocate? When do you advocate? What are the things to advocate for? Right. And so through Beacon Block, I've helped train literally hundreds of community advocates on how this process works and how they can plug into it. It's something that I've done with Beacon Block. It's something I'm going to continue to do with Beacon Block. And it's something that, you know, if elected, I will absolutely continue to do. That political education is so important to me. We mentioned me being a lawyer. We mentioned me working at the State House. The utility of those things for me, and the reason why I've always chased after those things, is not so that I can have a seat of power. It's not so that I can have this big lofty degree and feel smart and important. It's because I was fortunate enough, yes, through lots of hard work. Don't get me wrong. I worked my butt off to get to where I am today. But there are plenty of people from communities like ours that work just as hard, if not harder, that don't get access to these places. So the value of my law degree, the value of the knowledge that I have in the State House, is only as valuable as how I am able to bring it back to community, is only as valuable as I'm able to take that access and give it to everybody else. There's a quote that I say all the time for people that know me. It's a Toni Morrison quote that it's just kind of how I've lived my life in the work that I do. And, you know, she was asked this question, like, what advice do you give your students? And she says, now that you have these jobs that you have been so brilliantly trained for, your job is that if you have power, to empower somebody else. That if you are free, you have to free somebody else. And that's it. That's why I'm running for this seat. The Congresswoman talked about how important it is, you know, people in the background. And I agree, I've been in the background for so long. And that is a role that I was happy to play and would be happy to continue to play. But I've just seen a sense of urgency in bringing people into the fold. And that's work that I've done. It's my entire professional and personal life has been about that work. And so I'm ready to bring that to the State House, ready to bring, you know, not a whole lot of people that look like me inside that building.
So let me go there a little bit, because with what the Congresswoman said, with what you're observing with our current mayor, in a vein of, I don't know where this is, and again, we're doing this in real time, from a vein of mental health, from a vein of it is apparent that people don't like what's changing in the city, and in the context of what you're doing at this state. I don't know the number of out gay, lesbian legislators in the State House, but I was going to ask this in the context before you just said what you said. I was going to ask you, what are your thoughts around this protest? Some of the sentiment of the protest of these first line funder responders, something. And then you brought up that point that you said either people that don't look like me. Where one, from a mental health standpoint, have you given, as Mark and James, have you given thought to that? Two, because this while we're progressive, people's true colors tend to come out when they see progress of someone like yourself. And so have you taken in it? Look at his eyes. If you know Mark, he's ready. Have you taken all of that into consideration, sir, and end with what with everything, first being Black, Latino, and I don't know how it's so interesting because they often ask us to categorize in which order we put our identity. No, we're just all. You know what I mean? Depending on, I just felt this, depending on the situation or what it is and who we're around, at what level who we are shows up. It depends on the situation. Let me get to my question. How are you prepared or ready to handle some of the just ignorance, racist, homophobic? Have you
I mean, listen, I have been Black, Puerto Rican, and queer all of my life. So one, it's not new, right? Like it's not new to me. Two, I was all of those things at the State House. And, you know, as you talked about with Beacon Block and all those things, I was not some anonymous figure, right? So like I've gotten hateful comments sent to my boss's office about me because of the advocacy that I have. So it's not new. It doesn't make it easy. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it a thing that I enjoy doing. But I stand so solidly in who I am and what I believe. I am unwavering in who I am. Like I said, I've never been any good at being anything other than 100% me. And so I know that if you're attacking me for who I am, then okay, that's life. I'll pray for you, because that sounds like a really, really sad way to live. And that's really it's unfortunate, but I'm prepared. And also, I've been very fortunate in my life to build around myself an incredible support system, right? Because as solidly as I stand in who I am, there's always days when it gets to you. There's always days you're like, wow, this is a lot. And I'm very fortunate that I've got a village around me to lift me up when I need that. And so I'm ready to take on that battle. And then to your other question about my feelings on these protests at the mayor's house, listen, it's par for the course when we all sign up to be an elected official or try to be an elected official, that people are going to disagree with us, and we're going to have to engage with that. That's the life. That's the job. Not at their home, not in their children. And you don't have to engage with racism and hatred, right? That's a next level. That's a next level. It's one thing for you to say, I don't agree with vaccine mandates. We can have that conversation, though I vehemently disagree. But you don't get to throw racial epithets at me. You don't get to intimidate well, I don't have children. You don't get to intimidate people's children, people's neighborhoods, right? Like that's not it. That's not okay. And the only other thing that I would say about that, just to add on to that, is get vaccinated. I fully believe with how hard this COVID is hitting me with being vaccinated, that if I was not vaccinated, there's a solid chance I wouldn't be here right now. It is so important that we take a community-minded approach to this. It's not just you. You don't live in a vacuum. You don't live in a bubble. You interact with people in community.
Mark, I agree. And I've talked to you a few times. You've been on the show. We've emailed, text. And I gotta say, that I first of all, as a Black man, I'm proud of you. As a gay Black man, I'm proud of you. As an advocate and so-called activist, I'm proud of you, sir, for stepping into this to do this. I will say, and you get this, this talking with our candidates is not an endorsement. It's ensuring that we have information of those that, and I did it the end of 20, and this year we couldn't do it, but I want to make sure that the Java Cafe gets an idea of non-incumbents so they can be introduced to them. And sir, in hearing and listening to you today, and it's the sentiment of others in the room today. Mark, I love that you say true to yourself, keep doing the work that God has assigned you to do. And so Mark, do me a favor, put in private chat. I'm gonna cut and paste it. Put the website, put the your handle, and I love, and that's one thing I've always peeped about you from the very beginning, is your authentic self exudes out of who you are. And I appreciate that. And I'm looking forward for great things. And one thing I know about this young man, that if not successful in what he's doing now, you're still going to see him.
I'm not going anywhere. I don't know if my comment appears on the Facebook Live, but I dropped it to you, the website.
Oh, no, it's trust me. Give me about 2 seconds. You talk for about 45 seconds. I'm going to work on the little graphic over here.
Yes, beautiful. So markforrep.com. That's FORREP.com. Go to the website, sign up for the newsletter, keep up to date with the campaign. I'm really excited about this. I'm really excited about this opportunity to fight for my community. I've always been about community. This is what I love to do. Like I said, everything that I've accomplished, everything that quote unquote makes me a success, on whatever definition of success you have, it is only meaningful because I can bring it back to community and because I can open this up. You shouldn't have to have a law degree and work in the State House for 3 years to understand how that building works.
And with that, if you're cool, we can end this segment right here before I go make some announcements. Anything else you want to say? But that right there.
I just want to say thank you. I want to, thank you for this platform. It's incredible. It's been so incredibly helpful to community members throughout the pandemic. And so thank you for having me on. Look forward to being on again sometime in the future. And for anyone out there, you know how to reach out to me now. Please do that if you would like to connect and chat more about this campaign, about what I'm doing and how you can plug into that work.
And that's the thing. Thank you for affirmation, because I wanted to end with that. One of the best ways that you can learn about the electoral process in Boston is to find a candidate's values, where you share common values, and go volunteer and get involved and work with that campaign. You will get that, especially this year with all the campaigns and how lit Boston and Mass Poly will be. This is the year to do it. Mark, I appreciate you. I'm going to go pay some. Oh, Jesus, it's 10:08. I'm going to go pay some bills and check in with you later on, man. But I appreciate you, sir. Godspeed to you.
Thank you.
And we'll talk soon.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Everyone, that was our candidate who is running, or a candidate rather, who is running for the 7th, Carlos, thank you, 7th Suffolk District as state representative. So I've held you for quite a few minutes over this morning. I just want to make you aware of a couple of announcements in reference to programming this week. Don't forget, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., we are talking with the great Joe Betancourt. He is the physician, the vice president at Mass General Hospital, that came up with the idea and said, Jimmy, hey, we love what you're doing. We want to get you this cadre of doctors to pull from, and we want to support you. And so Dr. Betancourt is coming in tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And then on Wednesday at 9 a.m., we are having gubernatorial candidate Sonia Chang Diaz is running for governor. She's coming on Wednesday at 9 a.m. And then on Thursday at 9 a.m., we have state this is a Boston Mass Poly, MA7 Poly sort of week. Liz Miranda is coming in to talk about her work and also being a candidate for the 2nd Suffolk District as state senator. And then we're going to ask you to save the date on next Wednesday, January 26th. He's the incumbent, and I still have to fix this graphic, Jesus. Okay, so anyway, Steve Tompkins is coming in on the 26th as well. And so please keep these dates in mind. It is Martin Luther King Day. I don't have a bunch of commentary outside of the fact. I'll take it to the word. Follow peace with all men, holiness, which counts as being separated. Separate yourself away from negativity. Separate yourself into helping people. No man shall, quote unquote, see the Lord. And so I encourage you to follow peace. And one of the foundational things in the Java Cafe is love. And I often say that sometimes we have to practice tough love, and sometimes sometimes we have to love from a distance, but we still love. And that is the root of which we do this service. And so thank you for tuning in today. There are a lot more events going on for MLK Day. There's the King Boston event on NBC. There's the Boston Children Chorus event that's going on. I don't have the graphics up and ready. Search MLK events in Boston, or go to NBC.com or KingBoston.com and BostonChildren'sChorus.com and get that information there. I'm going to close out with the comments real quick. I've seen a lot of debate going on about housing, and so that is definitely awesome. My only thing is just let's keep it respectable and respect everybody's experience and knowledge base. And if we can share more, share it in a manner that is engaging and not offsetting, says James, who used to cuss people out on Facebook Live. Hey, Danny, I done called him a lot in my life. That's why I'm still here. All right, Susie, thank you for all you do as well. Rob, my brother, is in the room. I seen Auntie Java was very active with Ma and others as well. Didn't get to all the comments, but I did see my sister in the room. Nicole, good to see you in the room, and others. And I'm going to get in trouble, start to name names. Carlos, thank you so much for your commentary and being in the room. Sister Soraya, Auntie Java, we got her. Heidi Ivy, Toy Burton is in the room from Dee Dee's Cry. Auntie Jeannie is in the room. My mother, Pastor Marion. Dalita, who is on vacation, is in the room. Props, my brother, is in the room. Gail Crump Swaby is in the room. Good to see you, Gail. Sharon Cornelius is in the room as well. I think I got everybody this morning. Thaddeus Miles is in the room. Good to see you in the room. Pastor Odom was in the room this morning. Toy Paula was in the room this morning. Thank you for the shout out on Facebook the other day. Michelle, Belinda, Good to see you. Lisa, the wife, was in the room. I think I got everybody. Clifton, saw you in the room. All right, Lasagna, good to see you in the room this morning. Dow Drumright, good to see you in the room. I got everybody this morning. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We will be back tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for your Healthy Java with Dr. Joseph Betancourt, talking about the impact of health equity. Okay. I just, yes, ma'am. Awesome. And these are one of the tenets or one of the values or principles of the Java Cafe, is learning from each other. And so thank you, Heidi, for that. And we will talk to you guys tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Have a wonderful MLK. Love on somebody today, and we'll see you soon. Peace out, everybody.